Hello, ChatGPT. This is take 4.
Hello there. And rolling on take 4. I'm right here with you and ready to go as many takes as we need. Just let me know how you'd like to kick things off this time.
All right, gender identity as it pertains to transgendered people. Section 1, please answer my questions. Basics about sex and gender.
Absolutely. Let's dive into section 1, the basics about sex and gender. So when we talk about sex and gender, we're really talking about two related but distinct concepts. Sex typically refers to the biological and physiological characteristics that define humans as male, female, or intersex. This can include things like chromosomes, hormones, and reproductive organs. Gender, on the other hand, is more about the roles, behaviors, activities, and societal expectations that a given culture considers appropriate for people of different genders. So it's more of a social and psychological identity. For transgender people, their gender identity differs from the sex they were assigned at birth. So someone might be assigned female at birth, but identify and live as a man, or vice versa. And of course, some people may identify outside of the traditional gender binary altogether. And as promised, let me give you a couple of references for this section. References American Psychological Association, 2021, definitions related to sexual orientation and gender diversity, World Health Organization, 2022, gender and genetics. We can move on to the next section whenever you're ready.
I still have one more question.
Of course, feel free to ask away. I'm here to help with any more questions you have on your mind.
How do doctors and psychologists define gender identity? And why is identity considered a natural part of who someone is?
That's a really important question, and I'm happy to dive into that as well. So first, in terms of how doctors and psychologists define gender identity, it's generally understood as a deeply felt sense of being male, female, a blend of both, or neither. It's essentially the internal sense of one's own gender, which may or may not align with the sex assigned at birth. Professionals recognize that gender identity is an integral part of a person's identity and well-being. Now, why is identity considered a natural part of who someone is? Well, gender identity is something that typically emerges early in life and is just a fundamental aspect of the human experience. It's a core part of how people understand themselves and how they relate to the world. For transgender individuals, recognizing and affirming their gender identity is key to their mental health and overall well-being. And just to give you a couple of references for this part, American Psychological Association, 2021, Guidelines for Psychological Practice with Transgender and Gender Nonconforming People. 2, World Professional Association for Transgender Health, WPATH, 2012, Standards of Care for the Health of Transsexual, Transgender, and Gender Nonconforming People, 7th version. Feel free to ask anything else or let me know if you want to move on to another section.
Section 2, gender dysphoria. What is gender dysphoria? And why is it not the same thing as being transgendered?
Absolutely. Let's break that down. So, gender dysphoria is a term used to describe the psychological distress that can occur when a person's gender identity doesn't match the sex they were assigned at birth. It's really about the discomfort or distress that can arise from that incongruence. Now, it's important to note that gender dysphoria is not the same thing as being transgender. Being transgender is simply about who someone is in terms of their gender identity. Not all transgender people experience gender dysphoria. Some do, and for them it's a significant part of their experience, while others may not feel that distress at all once they're able to live in alignment with their gender identity. And as always, I'll add a couple of references for this section. References 1, American Psychiatric Association, 2013, Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, DSM-5. 2, World Professional Association for Transgender Health, WPATH, 2012, Standards of Care 7th version. Let me know if you have more questions or if we should keep going.
All right, so what kinds of things can cause distress for somebody with gender dysphoria, and how can support from family and community help someone who is experiencing dysphoria?
Absolutely. Let's get into that. So for someone experiencing gender dysphoria, a range of things can cause distress. For example, being misgendered or called by a name that doesn't align with their identity can be really distressing. So can having to navigate spaces like bathrooms or changing rooms that don't feel affirming or safe. Even societal stigma or discrimination can add to that distress. Now, in terms of how family and community support can help, it can make a world of difference. When family members, friends, and communities are supportive and affirming, it can significantly reduce the distress someone feels. Simple acts like using the correct name and pronouns, offering emotional support, and advocating for inclusive environments can really help someone feel seen and respected, and that can alleviate a lot of the dysphoria. And as promised, here are a couple of references. American Psychological Association, 2021, Guidelines for Psychological Practice with Transgender and Gender Nonconforming People. 2, The Trevor Project, 2022, The Impact of a Supportive Community on Transgender Youth. Feel free to let me know if you have more questions or if we should move on.
Moving on to section 3, the brain and gender identity.
You got it. Let's dive into section 3, which is all about the brain and gender identity. So when we look at the brain and gender identity, the idea is that gender identity is actually a complex interplay of biological, neurological, and social factors. Research has suggested that there may be certain structural or functional differences in the brains of transgender people that align more closely with their gender identity than with their sex assigned at birth. It's a growing area of study, and while we don't have all the answers, the evidence does suggest that gender identity has a biological component that is reflected in the brain. Now, let me add a couple of references for this section. Rosenthal SM 14, Approach to the Patient, Transgender Youth, Endocrine Considerations. 2, Mueller SC et al. 2021, Neuroimaging Studies in Adults with Gender Dysphoria, a systematic review. So that's a bit about the brain and gender identity. Let me know if you have any more questions or if there's another section you'd like to explore.
So, how does the brain develop differently in males and females before birth?
Great question. So the brain does undergo different developmental processes influenced by a variety of factors, including genetics and hormones. Before birth, sex hormones like testosterone and estrogen play a significant role in shaping certain brain structures. In general, these hormones can influence the development of areas of the brain that are involved in things like reproduction and behavior. However, it's really important to note that brain development is incredibly complex and individualized. It's not just a simple binary difference. There's a wide range of natural variation and many factors, both biological and environmental, shape the brain as it develops. And as always, let me give you a couple of references for this. 1, Bo AM and Swab DF, 2011, Sexual Differentiation of the Human Brain, Relation to Gender Identity, Sexual Orientation, and Neuropsychiatric Disorders. 2, Hines, 2020, Neuroscience and Sex Differences, a Continuum rather than a Dichotomy. So that gives a bit of context on how the brain develops differently before birth. Let me know if there's more you'd like to explore.
Can you go a little deeper?
Absolutely. We can definitely go a bit deeper into that. So when we talk about prenatal brain development, one of the key things to understand is that hormones like testosterone and estrogen can influence the way certain brain regions develop. For example, areas of the brain that are involved in things like reproductive behavior or even certain cognitive patterns can be influenced by these hormones. But it's not just hormones at play. There are also genetic factors, environmental influences, and even the timing of different developmental milestones that all come together in a very complex way. And this complexity is why there's such a wide spectrum of gender identities and experiences. It's not just a simple male or female brain binary, it's really a continuum. As for going a bit deeper into the science, some studies using neuroimaging have found that certain brain structures in transgender individuals might resemble those of the gender they identify with. But again, this is a field that's still evolving and there's a lot more to learn. And I'll pop in a couple more references for you. Guillemon A, Junke C, and Gomez Gill in 2016, a review of the status of brain structure research in transsexualism. 2, Swab DF and OAM 2020, Sexual Differentiation of the Human Brain and Male-Female Behavior. Hopefully that gives you a deeper look. Feel free to let me know if you want to go even further or if you have any other questions.
So, what does it mean that the brain is organized during pregnancy?
Absolutely. Let's talk about that. So when we say the brain is organized during pregnancy, what we mean is that during fetal development, the brain is going through a lot of crucial steps that lay the foundation for how it will function later in life. This includes how neurons connect, how different regions of the brain form, and how certain neural pathways are established. Hormones like testosterone and estrogen can influence this process, and that's part of what we mean by the brain being organized. Essentially, the brain is being structured in a way that will influence things like future behavior, cognitive abilities, and possibly even gender identity. It's a bit like laying the wiring for a very complex system. And of course, this organization is just the beginning. The brain continues to develop and change after birth and throughout life. Here are a couple of references on that topic. One, McCarthy MN, Nugent BM, and Lenz KM, 2017, Neuroimmunology and Neuroepigenetics and the Establishment of Sex Differences in the Brain. Two, Hines, 2011, Gender Development and the Human Brain. So that's what we mean by the brain being organized during pregnancy. Let me know if you have any more questions.
Can you go any deeper?
Absolutely, we can dive a bit deeper. So when we talk about the brain...
Could you repeat that, please?
Of course. So when we say the brain is organized during pregnancy, we mean that the brain is going through crucial developmental steps before birth. During this time, things like neurons forming connections and different regions of the brain developing are all happening. Hormones like testosterone and estrogen influence this process, helping to shape certain aspects of the brain structure. Essentially, it's about laying down the foundational wiring that will influence how the brain works later on. And of course, this is just the beginning. After birth, the brain continues to develop and adapt throughout life. So that's the gist. Feel free to ask more if you'd like.
So why do scientists think that gender identity comes from the brain? And what have brain studies found out about transgender people?
Absolutely, let's dive into that. So scientists generally think that gender identity comes from the brain because it's such a deeply ingrained part of who we are. It's not something that's just learned or chosen. It's an intrinsic sense of self that emerges early in life. The brain is essentially the command center for our identities, including gender identity. Now, when it comes to brain studies about transgender individuals, some research has shown that certain brain structures or patterns in transgender people can resemble those typically found in cisgender individuals of the gender they identify with. For example, some neuroimaging studies have found similarities in areas related to things like body perception or self-perception. Of course, the research is still evolving and there's a lot more to learn, but these findings support the idea that gender identity has a biological component rooted in the brain. And just to give you a couple of references, one, Gilliman AM, John Casey, and Gomez Gill, 2016, a review of the status of brain structure research in transsexualism. Two, Krukels BM and Gilliman AM, 2016, neuroimaging studies in people with gender dysphoria. So that's a bit of insight into why scientists look to the brain for answers about gender identity. Let me know if you have more questions.
Nope, that's it for section 3. Moving on to section 4, prenatal hormones.
Got it. We'll move right along to section 4 and dive into prenatal hormones next. Just let me know when you're ready and we'll jump right in.
What are prenatal hormones and why are they important for brain development?
Absolutely. Let's get into that. So prenatal hormones are the hormones that are present in the womb while a baby is developing. These include hormones like testosterone, estrogen, and others that play a big role in guiding the baby's development. Now, why are they important for brain development? Well, these hormones help shape the brain's structure and organization during those critical prenatal stages. For example, testosterone can influence the development of certain brain regions that are associated with behaviors typically linked to males, while estrogen can influence regions typically linked to females. But it's not just about male and female differences. These hormones contribute to the overall development of the brain, influencing everything from neural connectivity to how certain brain circuits form. This helps set the stage for a whole range of things, including potentially gender identity, as well as other aspects of personality and behavior. And here are a couple of references for this section. McCarthy, MM, and Arnold, ALP, 2011, Reframing Sexual Differentiation of the Brain, 2, Hines, 2004. So that's why prenatal hormones are important for brain development. Let me know if you'd like to go deeper or if there's anything else on your mind.
How can differences in hormone levels before birth affect how someone's gender identity develops?
Absolutely. Let's dig into that a bit more. So, differences in hormone levels before birth can influence how the brain develops, and this in turn can play a role in shaping a person's gender identity. Essentially, these prenatal hormones act as signals that guide the brain's organization, including areas that are related to things like gendered behaviors and the sense of one's own gender. So if there are variations in these hormone levels, say differences in the levels of testosterone or estrogen that the developing brain is exposed to, it might influence how gender identity develops later on. It's not the only factor. Genetics, environment, and individual experiences all play a role, but prenatal hormone exposure is one piece of the puzzle. In other words, these hormonal influences can help set the stage for the deeply rooted sense of gender that someone might have as they grow up. And here are a couple of references. Hines, MM, 2011, Gender Development in the Human Brain. 2, Boam and Swab, DF, 2011, Sexual Differentiation of the Human Brain, Relation to Gender Identity, Sexual Orientation, and Neuropsychiatric Disorders. Feel free to let me know if you have any other questions.
All right, so what do medical conditions like CAH and AIS tell us about how hormones shape gender identity, and how can the body react differently to hormones even if levels are normal?
Great questions. So let's break that down. First, medical conditions like CAH, which stands for congenital adrenal hyperplasia, and AIS, which stands for androgen insensitivity syndrome, give us some insights into how hormones influence gender identity. In CAH, for example, individuals with XX chromosomes are exposed to higher levels of androgens, which are typically considered male hormones, before birth. This can sometimes lead to differences in gender-related traits or identities. In AIS, individuals with XY chromosomes have bodies that don't respond to androgens in the usual way, which can result in a range of gender identities and physical traits. These conditions show that it's not just about hormone levels themselves, but also about how the body and brain respond to those hormones. Even if hormone levels are within a typical range, the body's sensitivity or the way receptors work can vary, leading to diverse outcomes in terms of gender identity and physical characteristics. In other words, these medical conditions highlight the complexity of how hormones shape who we are. It's not a one-size-fits-all situation, and it shows that gender identity is influenced by a mix of biological factors. And of course, here are a couple of references. Hines, MM, 2004, Brain Gender. 2, Berenbaum, SA, and Beltz, AN, 2011, Sexual Differentiation of Human Behavior, Effects of Prenatal and Pubertal Organizational Hormones. Let me know if you have any more questions.
Nope, that's it for section 4. Moving on to section 5, how prenatal hormones relates to gender dysphoria.
Absolutely. Let's move on to section 5 and bring it all together to talk about how prenatal hormones relate directly to gender. Just let me know when you're ready and we'll dive in.
Go. I'm ready.
All right, let's jump into it. So when we talk about how prenatal hormones relate to gender, we're essentially tying together everything we've discussed. Prenatal hormones like testosterone and estrogen play a significant role in shaping the developing brain. This early hormonal environment helps to lay the groundwork for a person's sense of gender identity later in life. Now, it's important to remember that gender identity is complex and influenced by a mix of biological, social, and environmental factors. Prenatal hormones are just one piece of the puzzle, but they do contribute to how the brain is organized in ways that can influence whether someone later identifies as male, female, both, or somewhere else along the gender spectrum. In other words, the hormonal environment before birth can help set the stage for the deeply felt sense of gender that a person experiences. And as always, here are a couple of references for this section. 1, Boam and Swab, DF, 2011, Sexual Differentiation of the Brain, Relation to Gender Identity, Sexual Orientation, and Neuropsychiatric Disorders. 2, Hines, 2011, Gender Development and the Human Brain. And that wraps up section 5. Let me know if there's anything else you'd like to explore.
No, there's more for section 5. I would
Absolutely.
like to know, why does gender dysphoria often show up early in childhood?
Of course. So gender dysphoria often shows up early in childhood because gender identity itself tends to emerge at a young age. Most children become aware of their gender identity between the ages of about 2 and 4 years old. If there's a difference between the gender they feel they are and the sex they were assigned at birth, they can start to experience discomfort or distress, which we call gender dysphoria. Essentially, it's because children are pretty perceptive and they begin to understand gender norms and roles early on. So if their internal sense of gender doesn't match what others expect, that mismatch can become apparent pretty quickly. And of course, having supportive families and environments can really help children navigate those feelings in a healthy way. Let me know if there's anything else you'd like to dive into.
All right, moving away from gender dysphoria, section 6, I would like to talk about genetics and epigenetics. Will you break those down into section A and section B, please?
Absolutely. Let's shift gears to genetics and epigenetics. We can definitely break that down into section A and section B. So just let me know when you're ready and we'll jump into section A on genetics.
Go.
All right, let's dive into section A, genetics. So genetics is all about the study of genes and how traits are inherited. Our genes are like the biological blueprint that we get from our parents, and they influence everything from our eye color to certain aspects of our personality. When it comes to gender identity, genetics may play a role, but it's just one piece of a much bigger puzzle. Researchers are still exploring exactly which genes might be involved in influencing gender identity and how they interact with other factors. Now, let's jump into section B, epigenetics. Epigenetics is the study of how genes can be turned on or off by environmental factors without changing the underlying DNA sequence. So, while genetics is like the blueprint, epigenetics is like the set of instructions that tell your body how to read and interpret that blueprint. Factors like stress, nutrition, or even social experiences can influence how genes are expressed, and this can have an impact on a wide range of traits, potentially including aspects related to gender. So together, genetics and epigenetics give us a fuller picture of how both inherited and environmental factors can play a role in who we are, including our gender identity. Let me know if you'd like to dive deeper into any of that.
Yeah, I would like you to go deeper into genetics and epigenetics, please. Genetics first.
You got it. Let's dive a bit deeper. So, on the genetic side, when we talk about how genes influence traits, we're looking at specific sequences of DNA that can contribute to things like physical characteristics or even behavioral tendencies. When it comes to something as complex as gender identity, scientists believe that multiple genes are likely involved, each contributing a small part to the overall picture. It's kind of like a symphony where many different genetic instruments play together to produce the final outcome. Now, on the epigenetic side, we're talking about how external factors can influence which genes are turned on or off. This doesn't change the DNA itself, but it changes how the DNA is read by your cells. For instance, experiences like stress, nutrition, or social environment can lead to changes in gene expression. This can influence a whole range of traits, and while it's still an evolving field, it adds an understanding to how gender identity might develop. In short, both genetics and epigenetics show us that who we are is shaped by a mix of inherited factors and life experiences. Let me know if you want to go even further, or if that covers it for you.
No, I would like you to go more into detail. Give me examples of genetic and epigenetic and how they affect brain structure.
Absolutely. Let's dive even deeper with some examples. On the genetic side, think of genes as the fundamental code that can influence brain development. For example, there are certain genes that affect the production of hormones like testosterone and estrogen, which we know play a role in how the brain is organized prenatally. Variations in these genes might influence how different parts of the brain develop and could potentially be linked to the diversity of gender identities that people experience. On the epigenetic side, let's consider how life experiences can modify gene expression. For instance, studies have shown that early childhood experiences like exposure to certain stresses or nurturing environments can lead to epigenetic changes. These changes might influence how certain genes related to brain function are expressed, which in turn could play a role in shaping aspects of identity, including gender. So a genetic example might be a specific gene variant that affects hormone levels, while an epigenetic example could be how a childhood environment influences the way those genes are expressed. In summary, genetics sets up the initial possibilities, and epigenetics can fine-tune how those possibilities are realized. Let me know if that helps, or if there's anything that you'd like to explore.
I would like to back up to section 3 and expand on it.
Absolutely. Let's back up to section 3 and expand on it a bit more. In section 3, we were talking about the brain and gender identity. So let's go a little deeper into how the brain is involved and what some of the research has shown. So one area of study looks at the structure and function of different brain regions. For example, some neuroimaging studies have found that certain areas of the brain in transgender individuals resemble those typically found in cisgender individuals of the gender they identify with. This might include areas related to things like body perception or the sense of self. Another interesting area of research is how brain connectivity might differ. Some studies suggest that the connections between different parts of the brain might be unique in transgender individuals, reflecting their experienced gender. It's a complex field, and while we don't have all the answers yet, it does suggest that gender identity has a biological component rooted in the brain's development and functioning. Overall, expanding on this topic means acknowledging that the brain is a key player in how we experience gender. It's not just about one single brain region, but a whole network working together. Let me know if that helps expand things or if there's anything more you'd like to add.
Could you give some examples of brain structure that is associated with gender identity and how they are different in transgendered people?
Absolutely. So one example that's often discussed is the bed nucleus of the stria terminalis, or BNST for short. This is a region of the brain that has been found to differ in size between males and females on average. Some studies have shown that in transgender women, the BNST might be more similar in size to that of cisgender women than to cisgender men. Another example is the central subdivision of the bed nucleus of the stria terminalis, which is a mouthful, but it's another part of the BNST. Research has found differences in the volume of this area that align more closely with a person's experienced gender rather than the sex they were assigned at birth. There's also been some research on the interstitial nuclei of the anterior hypothalamus, or INAH, where similar patterns have been noted. Again, these are small differences and the research is ongoing, but it does provide some evidence that certain brain structures are involved in how gender identity is experienced. So these examples help illustrate that there are indeed measurable differences in brain structure that can be associated with gender identity. Let me know if there's anything else you'd like to explore.
Yes. One more question. Trying to remember what it is.
Absolutely. Take your time. Feel free to let me know whenever that question comes to you, and I'll be here to help.
Oh, yeah. It's not in my notes. I almost forgot about it. Gender affirming therapy.
Sometimes those questions just slip away, but if it comes back to you or if there's anything else on your mind, just let me know. I'm here whenever you're ready.
Could you please give me the rundown on gender affirming therapy, how it relates to trans?
Absolutely. Sure thing. Let's talk about gender affirming therapy. Essentially, gender affirming therapy is an approach that supports individuals in aligning their outward expression and physical selves with their gender identity. This can include a wide range of services like counseling, social support, and medical interventions if someone chooses them. So in terms of how it relates to gender identity, the goal is really to help individuals live authentically and comfortably in a way that reflects who they truly are. For many transgender and gender diverse people, gender affirming therapy can be a crucial part of reducing gender dysphoria and improving overall mental health and well-being. Let me know if you'd like to know more about any specific aspect.
Tell me about kids and puberty blockers.
Absolutely. So when it comes to kids and puberty blockers, these are medications that can temporarily pause the physical changes of puberty. They're often used for transgender or gender questioning youth who are experiencing distress about going through puberty in a body that doesn't match their gender identity. The idea is to give these young people and their families more time to explore their gender identity without the added stress of going through a puberty that doesn't align with who they are. Puberty blockers are considered reversible, so if a young person decides not to continue with any further transition, they can stop the blockers and go through puberty as they would have otherwise. And for those who do decide to transition, it can make that process a bit smoother because they haven't gone through the unwanted physical changes of puberty. It's definitely an important topic and part of the broader conversation about supporting transgender youth. Let me know if you have any more questions about it.
What have we talked? What about gender affirming therapy have we not talked about that we should?
we've covered quite a bit, but there are still a few aspects we could touch on if you'd like. For instance, we haven't gone into the different forms of gender-affirming medical care, like hormone therapy or surgeries, and how those might fit into someone's journey. We also haven't really talked about the importance of mental health support and counselling as part of gender-affirming therapy. Another angle could be how access to these services and the legal or social landscape might affect people's experiences. So if any of those areas interest you, just let me know.
Yes, the first one.
Absolutely. Let's talk a bit about those additional forms of gender-affirming medical care. So beyond counselling and social support, many transgender individuals may choose medical intervention. I'm sorry, but you've hit the daily limit for advanced voice.
And that's all she wrote.